22, the chapter in itself is pretty easy. The issue is we don't know why it's in there. I'm surrounded by a bunch of weirdos. We don't know why it's in there. It comes as a section after the distributing of the land. And then we have this issue. So we're going to talk about essentially why it's in here at the end of it. But you could probably summarize chapter 22 as a monumental miscommunication. And that's something that we've dealt with. How many of us have been stuck in a situation where there was a miscommunication and things got weird or things got hard and they happened quickly? So we get to study all of the fun aspects of a miscommunication because we're going to see all of the factors that are normally a part of our miscommunication. It's actually something we're going to see in chapter 22. We're going to see that there is going to be a word spoken or an action taken that's going to lead to a hurt or to an offense. We're going to learn that there is hearsay or gossip that's going to be a part of it. And then we're going to see a counter word or counter action based off of everything else that we have studied. That's essentially what we're going to be dealing with in the text this evening. So, chapter 22, verse 1. Then Joshua called the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I have commanded you. You have not left your brethren these many days up to this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brethren as he promised them. Now therefore return, go to your tents and to the land of your possession, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But take careful heed to the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. Now to half the tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given possession in Bashan, and to the other half of it, Joshua gave a possession among their brethren on this side of the Jordan westward. And indeed, when Joshua sent them away to their tents, he blessed them and spoke to them, saying, "Return with much riches to your tents, with very much livestock, with silver, with gold, with bronze, with iron, and with very much clothing. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brethren." So the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh returned and departed from the children of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the country of Gilead, to the land of their possession, which they had obtained according to the word of the Lord by the hand of Moses. So verses 1 through 9 can be summarized as discharge. They are being, the half-tribe of Manasseh, Reuben and Gad, they are being faithfully discharged from their military service and being allowed to return to their homes in the Transjordan. You remember before the conquest of Canaan actually started, what we're dealing with in the book of Numbers and in Deuteronomy, they settled in the land east of Jericho on the east side of the Jordan. That's the Transjordanian area. And these 2.5 tribes were looking around, and they weren't making a decision based off of something spiritual. They were making a decision based off of something physical, something material. They were looking around at the land. It's like, you know what, this land, it ain't half bad. They've got pastures. It's well watered. You know, if someone had a whole bunch of cattle and a whole bunch of herds and many flocks, this would be the spot for them. It's like, you know who has all that stuff? We got all that stuff. So they petitioned Moses. They're like, "Hey, Mo, why don't we just, the 2.5 tribes of us, why don't we just camp out on the east side of the Transjordan?" And Moses was a little bit cautious at that point because it sounded like they were trying to get out of the military campaign for the land of Canaan. And they came to an agreement. You can take this land. You can leave your flocks here. You can leave your families here, your kids here. You can leave some people behind to help maintain the land and protect what you have. But the rest of you, you're fighting men. You will go with the other 9.5 tribes. And then after we get done conquering Canaan, you can return. They agreed to it. And in verses 1 through 3, we see these wonderful words spoken by Joshua to these men and their diligence, their faithfulness to Moses, to the Lord, to Joshua, to their brethren. The 7 years of fighting are over. The distribution of the land is over. You remember those, 7 chapters that we had to cover for the distribution of land? All that's done. So now he's gone. Now Joshua is sending those 2.5 tribes back into their land with a blessing. But you notice in verse 5, he also gives 6 very careful exhortations for the 2.5 tribes that are going to the east side of the Transjordan. This is what I would imagine. We're not there yet, and I'm hoping the rapture takes place first, but like when my kids go to college, this is probably what's going to transpire. They're leaving. He's sending 2.5 tribes away, and you have to remember, they've been a very close-knit group for 38 years as that next generation was being raised up. Because you have to remember, all of that previous generation had passed away in the desert. They had fallen in the desert because of their rebellion at Kadesh Barnea. So they're not only trudging through the desert together, but every single family had to deal with loss together. And then they all had to deal with war together. And then they all had to sit through 7 chapters of the distribution of the land together. They've been close. And now they're going to be divided. On top of that one, Joshua kind of understands that there's going to be, as he's dealing with the departure, but he understands there's going to be a separation. And that's one of the reasons he's giving this huge exhortation, because they're moving further from the altar, they're moving further from their brethren, and closer to their enemies. And they're not just spiritually separated, right? They're distance from the altar, but they're also geographically separated, since you have the Jordan River separating 2.5 tribes from the other 9.5 tribes. So he gives them 6 careful exhortations. The first one, take careful heed to do the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. So the first one, you need to know the word and you need to obey the word. To know the word and not obey the word is just not going to do you any good. He's calling to that place of obedience to the word. I think I have to point out 2 things. First, obedience is not the same as compliance. Obedience is not the same thing as compliance. Our obedience, our motive for obedience has to be love. That is the obedience that counts. Even Jesus said, if you love me, obey my commandments. So there is a difference between obedience and compliance. Those of you that are parents, we know full well that there's a difference between obedience and compliance. What we want is obedience through a relationship of love, not compliance that's going to continue to lead to more rebellion. And the other thing you point about obedience, it proves relationship. If you love me, obey my commandments. Everyone will know that you are my disciples by the way you love one another. Love is the bigger factor in this concept of obedience and relationship. Our obedience to the Lord proves our relationship to the Lord, our relationship with the Lord. It does not produce a relationship with the Lord, which is why he continues to segue the way that he does, caring for their spiritual walk, their spiritual health. Next, he says to love the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways, talking about the fellowship with the Lord. Keep his commandments, hold fast, and to serve him. I love those 2 commands, those 2 exhortations. To hold fast, to hold on to tightly, because it's easy to start to fall away, especially when you're so much further from the altar than everybody else. There's a lot of people that I talk to, a lot of my family members that I talk to. It's like, oh, you going to a church? It's like, oh, absolutely. In this other state. I was like, that's crazy. You guys are driving like 15 hours to go to church? It's like, oh, no, we just do it online. I was like, okay. Well, why not maybe something a little closer? It's like, no, I don't like that one. Or we've had the churches that are just like 30 minutes away. We don't want to go. That's 30 minutes. 30 minutes in a car ride. That's not too bad. They're all the way in the Transjordan area. They have to pass over the Jordan, through Jericho, and then make their way up into Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle is currently sitting, to worship. So it's easy. You might be on fire initially, but that fire kind of sputters out. So Joshua Joshua is encouraging them to hold fast and to serve. An action that's drawing us closer to the Lord. And so he sends them off. Verses 1 through 9 is discharge. They are done with their military service and then go home to their families. And as much as they are probably a little heartbroken, if you're fighting 7 years straight, I can't imagine what that would do to a unit in a good way. My longest deployment was 12 months. The other ones were like 9 and 7 months, but you're with these guys day in, day out. You have to go through all of life together, all of your combat tour together. And when it comes time to actually separate, you find yourself, even though you're home, you're with family, you find yourself, you know what, something's missing. Something's missing out of my daily routine. 7 years. And now they're breaking away from their brethren, but they do get to see their family, those 2.5 tribes that they haven't seen in the last 7 years. So 1 through 9, discharge. Verse 10 can be summarized with decision. And when they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great, impressive altar. Uh-oh. This altar, as we'll soon unpack, is an identical replica, but way bigger, of the altar that is inside the tabernacle. So I know I like the faces. I like looking at your faces when I say that, because some of you know that that's just bad. It's just bad. They built this massive altar, and that word for, where is it at? A great impressive altar, meaning it's large in physical size to where you can see it from a great distance away. So not only they build this huge altar, and they built it way bigger as a replica, they also built it on whose side of the river? They built it on the west side of the river. Not even on their own side, but they built it on the, for lack of better words, the Canaan side, the Canaan territory of the Jordan River. So we can start to see, you know, what is going to spiral next, especially with all of the exhortations that were given. We're going to come back to why they built the altar. Verse 11. So we have discharge, we have decision. Verse 11 brings us to danger. Now the children of Israel heard someone say. This is where we get the word hearsay. We probably more aptly know it as what? Gossip. And gossip is such a poisonous thing, especially when there's already a miscommunication. Then you throw gossip into the mix. What a wildfire does that thing turn into? So they heard someone just kind of say, someone just introduced. There's this gossiping piece. It doesn't even tell us who said it. So the children of Israel heard someone say, behold, or gaze at intently. Behold, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the region of Jordan, on the children of Israel's side. So it's gossip. It's this juicy little morsel of either a rival altar or a rival religion, a rival worship. This is how they are going to perceive that particular event. So this thing that was designed to be a symbol of unity, we'll get into that one, it looks like a symbol of what? It looks like a symbol of apostasy. And this is the information that the children of Israel are getting as it pertains to the tribe that just moved further away from the tabernacle. And the children of Israel, and when the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered together at Shiloh to go to war against them. So it's neat. They're gathering. I don't know what the time span is here, but they're gathering together at Shiloh, the place of the legitimate altar, to gather to go to war against the brethren they just finished fighting a 7-year war with. And the children of Israel sent Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, to the children of Reuben, to the children of Gad, to the half-tribe of Manasseh, into the land of Gilead. And with him 10 rulers, one ruler from the chief house of every tribe of Israel, and each one was the head of the house of his father Yeah, each one was the head of the house of his father among the divisions of Israel. At least there's some wisdom with Eleazar. Now we remember Eleazar in, where was it? Numbers chapter 25. That was that Baal of Peor incident when King Balak had hired King Balaam to curse the children of Israel. Remember that one, right? Initially, Balak wasn't supposed to go, but then he went anyway. And God told him, he's like, you know what? You were going to speak only the words that I put in your mouth. Balaam warned the king. He's like, I can only speak what I can speak. 3 times he got up to curse the children of Israel, and 3 times he ended up speaking these most wonderful blessings over the camp of Israel. And Balak was not happy. He's like, you know what? Go and die a poor guy. If you can't do the simple thing that I got you to do, just go somewhere and die, which we saw in Joshua. That's what happened. But Balaam told him, he's like, you know what? I can't curse them, but you can get them to curse themselves. They have prosperity because of their relationship, their covenant relationship to the Lord. You get them to break that covenant relationship, things might change. So they sent the Moabite women into the camp, which invited the Israelite men out of the camp to a worship practice of Baal that led to the death of 24,000 Israelites. But one of those Israelite men, you remember this one, he brought in one of the Moabite women right in front of the tabernacle and took the woman into his tent to essentially be his wife. And it was Phinehas, right? The priest with the amazing aim, like he followed him into the tent with the javelin and speared both of them. So we see his zealousness for the Lord. It's Phinehas, not Joshua, which is interesting, who's leading the endeavor of this process. They're going to send Phinehas with a delegation of some men, some of the heads of the households, to talk to them first prior to war. Kind of giving us great commentary on Proverbs 18:13. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. So at least they're not fully acting on hearsay. That's the other thing that gets us in trouble as it pertains to gossip. First, we allow it to transpire. And then second, we jump on it as credible intel, as we would call it in my background. We allow those two things to transpire, and it brings kind of a poison to the church. So we see Phinehas taking a group of men, a small delegation, and he's going to go and speak to the congregation in the Transjordan. Verse 16 begins our section of dialogue. So we have discharge, decision, danger, now dialogue, verse 16. Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what treachery is this that you have committed against the God of Israel to turn away this day from following the Lord, in that you have built yourselves an altar that you might rebel against the Lord this day. So he's got 3 charges, essentially, that he is bringing against the 2.5 tribes. These are serious charges. First one is treachery, meaning bringing in a rival worship system. It's an altar. When they were brought into Canaan, they were given the command to tear out all of their high places of worship, tear out all of their worship establishments, their altars, their pillars. They're supposed to tear all that out, and they're supposed to burn it down. Now they have erected one, and they've put it on the west side of the Jordan. So he accuses them of rival worship. He accuses them of turning away from the Lord, and then he calls them rebels, which means you are being deliberately resistant to the Lord. So it's Phinehas with strong words and strong accusations for those 2.5 tribes. Is the iniquity of Peor not enough for us, from which we are not cleansed till this day, not cleansed till this day, although there was a plague in the congregation of the Lord. I want to move down to verse 20 real quick. Did not Achan, the son of Zerah, commit a trespass in the accursed thing, and wrath fell on the congregation of Israel, and that man did not perish alone in his iniquity? Now Phinehas is going to capitalize on a very important point. Sin defiles the camp. We have a kind of a problem with that one in the church, on both the individual level and the corporate level. The individual level is like, you know what, it's just a harmful little sin. Just a little bit's not going to hurt anybody, and especially if nobody knows, it isn't going to hurt anybody. And then at the institutional level, the corporate level, when we come together as a church, like, oh, you know what, that sin's not so bad. As long as it's not this one, everything else is probably going to be fine. And we've seen a great deal of churches, hopefully not in this one, there's a great deal of sins that we just kind of shrug our shoulders at while really pointing the fingers at another one. He's reminding those 2.5 tribes, sin is going to defile the whole camp. When he says, was not Peor enough for you? We just discussed what transpired at Peor, Numbers chapter 25. Their sin with the Moabite women led to the death of 24,000 Israelites. And then he goes back into Joshua chapter 7 and the sin of Achan. We remember that one. Achan took something from Jericho that he wasn't supposed to take. All of the loot, all of the spoils, right? The first fruits of the campaign, all of those things were going to go to the Lord. They were allowed to essentially take anything else from any other city they wanted to, just not the first one. But Achan took a whole bunch of stuff and buried it in his tent. He says, even Achan, on a small little level, he took something. How many of those, how many things have we stolen? It's like, you know what, it's so small that it doesn't really matter. They're only losing 2 cents. Or how many of us have been in a place like, you know what, if they didn't want me to steal it, they wouldn't have left a whole bunch of them out there for us to look at. Sometimes they're pens. I said that before, but then a lot of people argued with me. It's like, they actually want you to take those pens because they're for advertisement. So we're not going to use pens. Just something else out there you're not supposed to steal. But how many people died in that incident? We know Achan died. Depending on how you're interpreting the text, we know his family died, but we also know that it caused the death of 36. The only deaths recorded in the whole 7-year campaign, it caused the deaths of 36 Israeli men at the Battle of Ai, at which they had been defeated. So Phinehas is reasoning with him from that standpoint. If you're doing this here for your land, it's going to affect all of the rest of Israel, since their prosperity is linked to their relationship and their obedience to the Lord and to his word. Verse 18. But that you must turn away this day from following the Lord. And it shall be, if you rebel today against the Lord, that tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation. Verse 19 is probably my favorite verse in this chapter. Nevertheless, if the land of your possession is unclean, then cross over to the land of the possession of the Lord, where the Lord's tabernacle stands, and take possession among us. But do not rebel against the Lord, nor rebel against us, by building yourselves an altar besides the altar of the Lord our God. You see how cool that verse is? It's like, you know what, you guys, if your land is defiled, meaning they have moved too far from the altar and too close to the enemy, they became kind of mixed with the enemy, their religion. It's like, you know what, that's probably why they're building this particular altar. Look what Phinehas tells them. So, you know what, if your land is defiled, come back. Come back closer to the altar. Yep, we're all full up on the Canaan side, but we're going to make room for your 2.5 tribes. We're going to squeeze you in there somewhere. He's begging them to move closer to the Lord, endure hardship in trying to squeeze in with other family members. How many of us are housing some of our family members? Even for a week, it gets a little rough, especially when your house is small already. It's like, you know, we're going to squeeze you in because your spiritual state is important. And if we are not spiritually pure, even if it's just on this side of the Transjordan, it's going to affect the west side of the Jordan River as well. So say, you know what? Come closer to the altar. And that's quite the statement. Once we get into Judges, we're going to know exactly what transpires on the east side of the river. But who would be willing to make that call? They'd be cutting, like, they're already settled. Their family's been living in the land for 7 years, right? They're doing school. They all have, full-time jobs. They're working the land. Their homes are already constructed. They've taken over other cities. They're just well established. How many people would cut all that loose at the invite to move closer to the Lord? This is essentially the proposition that Phinehas is giving to the 2.5 tribes. Verse 21. Then the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, And the half tribe of Manasseh answered and said to the heads of the divisions of Israel, the Lord God of gods, the Lord God of gods. They're using the Lord's name 6 times. El, Elohim, Yahweh. This is essentially what they are. They're calling for the Lord to testify in the situation, is essentially what they're doing. He knows, and let Israel itself know, if it is in rebellion or if in treachery against the Lord, do not save us this day. I like that bit of wisdom, right? A soft answer turns away wrath. We know that from Proverbs. They're not responding in anger. In a situation of miscommunication, especially when one party takes it too far, right? He shows up with a delegation. It doesn't say he mentioned the armies that are ready to invade those 2.5 tribes. It's like, you know what? You guys are wrong. You're rebelling. You just need to move home. You need to come back home and make sure that you're closer and make sure you're right with the Lord. You're surrounded by your brothers in the Lord. You're surrounded by your kin. But you're being rebellious. You're being treacherous. And the response is, we call on the Lord. If we have responded in rebellion or treachery, just let him strike us down. So now we start their reasoning as to why they built the altar. If we have built ourselves an altar to turn from following the Lord, or if to offer on it burnt offerings or grain offerings, or if to offer peace offerings on it, let the Lord himself require an account. So their first statement is weird. They do not say they did not build the altar, they built the altar. But they're saying is they built for themselves a bloodless altar. They've built for themselves an altar, a massive one, which is going to become a problem later. But they're not planning on actually doing anything with it. It's just for looksies, not for usies. No sacrifice is going to be going on to the altar. Verse 24, this is why. So they've established why they did not build it. Now they're going to tell them why they built it. But in fact, we have done it for fear. That's never a good thing. Filled with the Spirit, led in the Spirit, commanded by the Lord, directed by his word. These are good reasons to do a thing. Out of fear is never a good reason to do a thing because it's a lack of faith. That is what that is demonstrating. It's for a lack of faith. When it goes back to decision in verse 10, they decided to build this massive altar that looks exactly like the one that's in the tabernacle. It was a decision based in fear. This should never be our response, especially as a church. We should not be making decisions out of fear. And now they're going to explain the reasonings of that fear. We have done it for fear, for a reason, saying, in time to come, your descendants may speak to our descendants, saying, what have you to do with the Lord God of Israel? So what is their fear? Because they're on the east side of the Jordan River, they're worried that at some point they're going to be told, hey, you're on the wrong side of the river. You have nothing to do with the worship of God on this side of the river. That's their fear. They built an altar as a reminder of who they belong to. But you notice where the blame is at. Who's the first people that they blame? Their kids. That's not nice. You say, you know what? There's going to come a time when your descendants, when your kids or your kids' kids, at some point in time down the line, they might forget about us, right? Out of sight, out of mind. That's essentially what we're dealing with. It's like then we're going to come here to offer on the altar, and their kids are going to be like, hey, you have no part with us. They're blaming their kids, which is kind of cute, especially when the altar is moved into Jerusalem, right, during the reign of David. And then after the reign of Solomon, at the first period of the 2 kings, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, it's the northern kingdom that cuts themselves off intentionally from the worship in the fellowship. So it's actually the other way around. They were blaming the wrong set of children. When it was their descendants, they're going to be guilty of this particular thing. So the first people group they blame is their descendants. Verse 25, for the Lord has made the Jordan a border between you and us. Your children, you children of Reuben and children of Gilead, you have no part in the Lord. So your descendants would make our descendants cease fearing the Lord. So now they're blaming one other person, And they're bringing in another reason. They're saying it's the Lord that put this border between the two of us. It isn't. Now, did the Lord put a natural border in there? Yes. But it's not God that set that border for the tribes. Those 2.5 tribes chose to be on the east side of the river. And they're coming back to the fact that the Judeans, essentially is what they will be called, are the reason that the northern kingdom has ceased fearing the Lord. So they have done this thing out of fear. Fear for a number of reasons. They're further from the altar. They're closer to the enemy. That's going to produce fear. They chose their territory for material gain, not spiritual wealth. That's going to add to fear. They're leaving their brothers and the nearness of the tabernacle. That's going to produce fear. This altar, the reason they built the altar was because their true basis of unity was the common worship centered in the sacrifices at the altar, which is why they built that altar. So some people say, well, it's a good thing that they built it. We're going to get into it, but it isn't. Especially when it's producing this kind of response and it's based out of fear. Verse 26. So after they give the blame to the Lord and they give the blame to the descendants of the other 9.5 tribes, they say, therefore, we said, let us now prepare to build ourselves an altar, not for burnt offering, nor for sacrifice, but that it may be a witness between you and us and our generations after us, that we may perform the service of the Lord before him with our burnt offerings, with our sacrifices, with our peace offerings, that your descendants may not say to our descendants in time to come, you have no part in the Lord. They're building the altar as a reminder to all of the generations. It's just neat, is they had to use the stones to be a witness because those 2.5 tribes were not the witness. They were using an artificial means to show everybody else that they belong to the Lord. We can use artificial means to show who we belong to because the lives that we live in worship do not demonstrate that thing. They were supposed to have lives of holiness and worship and fellowship with the other 9.5 tribes. That was supposed to be the witness. Because you remember that united bond that they have is all in the altar of sacrifice. They're all the people of the Lord. But they're moving out of fear. But what they're also doing is giving themselves something of a fallback. They're already planning on apostasy, which is why they're putting the altar there. So the altar, not a good idea. Therefore, we said that it will be, when they say this to us or to our generations in time to come, that we may say, here is the replica of the altar of the Lord, which our fathers made, though not for burnt offerings, not for sacrifices, but it is a witness between you and us. They shouldn't have needed it. Now we know, for starters, there was 3 feasts annually. They were required as the males to go back to and to make their offerings. They had Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, these 3 feasts that required their travels. But they also had other offerings, other sacrifices that had to be rendered within the tabernacle at Shiloh and later at Jerusalem as well. It would seem, and we'll see it kind of unfold and unpack in the book of Judges, but it would seem they're just planning on doing the 3 feasts and not any of the other ones. How many of us have a family so large you actually don't know who's in the family? Just me? Makes me wonder what else you guys are lying about. Oh, okay, there's one. Yeah, you've seen Megan's family. We have a niece. She's not brand new. She's a year old. Her 1-year birthday is going to be Sunday. And Megan's like, well, I want to stay gone in Twin Falls, for a couple extra days so I can see I want to be there for Eliana's birthday. But when I heard Eliana, I wasn't thinking of my niece. I've only seen her like once. I was thinking of Kate's daughter because she was just at the house, hanging out. So I was like, what? Okay. Why are we skipping some stuff for that birth? And what are they doing in Twin Falls? And Megan just looked at me. She was like, are you kidding me right now? I was like, I would love an answer. Yes. She was like, my niece is named Eliana. Which one? Whole bunch of trouble. I should have just nodded and smiled. Everything would have been fine. The less you see them and the less contact you have them, now granted, now we have Facebook and Twitter and all the other weird nonsense that we have out these days. They're not going to be able to see each other like that all the time. So the less that they're gone, the less people are going to be familiar with them, and we know what that does with certain relationships. So we can kind of see what it is that they're preparing themselves for. It's like, you know what, just so you know, when we do come back eventually, that's what this altar is for. They're using this artificial thing so that they don't have to walk it out personally. Far be it from us, verse 29, that we should rebel against the Lord and turn from following the Lord this day, to build an altar for burnt offerings, for grain offerings, for sacrifices, besides the altar of the Lord our God, which is before his tabernacle. Now when Phinehas the priest and the rulers of the congregation, the heads of the divisions of Israel, who were with him, heard the words that the children of Reuben, children of Gad, children of Manasseh spoke, it pleased them. Then Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, said to the children of Reuben, children of Gad, and the children of Manasseh, this day we perceive that the Lord is among us, because you have not committed this treachery against the Lord. Now you have delivered the children of Israel out of the hand of the Lord. This is dangerous. It's a dangerous spot. They're happy with the answer. Nobody asked if the Lord was happy with it. They are pleased because there was no repercussions. They perceived that the Lord was still with them because there was no destruction poured out on the Israelites at that point in time. Now we will see again, once we get as early as Judges chapter 1, that we see what this thing is going to do as far as segueing into the worship of false gods here in a couple weeks in Judges. So because of unity and an absence of wrath, they are pleased, and they assume, because they didn't ask, they assume that the Lord is pleased. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, and the rulers returned from the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the land of Gilead to the land of Canaan, to the children of Israel, and brought back word to them. So the thing pleased the children of Israel, and the children of Israel blessed God. They spoke no more of going against them in battle, to destroy the land where the children of Reuben and Gad dwelt. The children of Reuben and the children of Gad called the altar witness, for it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. So the chapter itself is pretty easy, right? We understand the chapter. There was a miscommunication because based off of a bad decision. They decided to build an altar without discussing it with anybody else. You know, is this a good idea? Of course it's a good idea. Let's just do the thing. What's that adage? It's better to ask for forgiveness. And easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. It looks like that's what they were doing here. They probably didn't even think of these ramifications. Someone saw the altar, whether they were constructing it or after it was built, and instead of asking the people, it's like, you know what? What are you doing? And what is this altar for? This is so going to make Joshua angry. Instead of asking, they took a level of assumption, right? That gossip, that juicy morsel, and they run with it. Gossip is so much fun to deal with. Church discipline bothers me. I hate having to render church discipline, except for gossip. It's one of my favorites to deal with because it's the most uncomfortable thing for the other person. Because there's two solid ways to stop gossip. Asking them about it directly. Have you spoken with the other person first? The answer is always, well, no. I came to you, so we can pray for them. It's typically how it sounds. But whatever it is they're saying, my favorite second question, can I quote you? Can I quote you on that? You go one of those two directions, it typically stops it. But this person took it back to the camp of Israel. It's like, hey, I don't know if you noticed it, but those Transjordanian guys, they built an altar on your side of the river. They spun up for war, sent out a delegation. They resolved it. So we have disarm as our last D for this section. The chapter's pretty vanilla. The real question is, why is it in there? And what lesson are we supposed to learn from this chapter? We have the distribution of the land and Joshua's farewell address. Sandwiched in between is this weird thing in the Israelites. I think I have 4 lessons. First, being led to an action out of fear should have no place in the camp of God's people. If we're not doing a thing by faith, in faith, or by His word, we really shouldn't be doing it. Number 2, artificial ways to let people know that they belong to God. I don't want to knock it because I got like 4 of them on the back of my car, but we have, how many artificial ways do we have right now where we show people who we belong to? T-shirts, bumper stickers. You guys seen the back of my Subaru and my truck. There's Bible college stickers, Jesus stickers. There's a dove. All sorts. I love Jesus. There's all sorts of stuff. Pens, notebooks, lanyard, all sorts of things. So if we have that I love Jesus bumper sticker on the back of our car and we're cutting people off in traffic and throwing trash out of our window, we have to have that artificial way to communicate, because our true witness, a life of holiness and obedience out of love to the Lord, we don't do it. Now, I'm not knocking anybody who has a sticker on the back of their car. Like, we're still giving away stickers in the back. But your life should match your profession of Christ. We shouldn't have to rely on an artificial thing. Number 2, a bloodless altar is never a good idea. That's the problem the church is having right now. Not ours, but I think the church as a whole. They built an altar as simply a demonstration, but it was going to be bloodless. The only issue for the altar was if there was going to be blood sacrifices on it. People have an issue with blood. People have an issue with the cross and the blood of the Messiah that was on it. And a lot of churches have moved away to a bloodless message. The removal of talking about sin and the need for the Messiah. The last point, which I think is the interpretation for my question, is the enemy now moves to attack within. They have just decimated all of their external enemy. And when the devil, something we've been studying through the New Testament, the devil can't get you from the outside as a lion prowling about to whom he may devour. He's going to attack as a serpent from the inside. They almost lost 2.5 tribes over a misunderstanding. A dumb action, but it led to an even deeper misunderstanding. The enemy loves to cause division. Most churches that divide, especially when they divide out of spite, they divide out of anger, they divide because a sinful thing came in. I don't know how many of those churches survive. They just kind of stay in ruins. And gossip is one of those cancers that do it, because it produces a lack of unity, a lack of trust within the fellowship, kind of that side chatter. And it bothers me when Christians try and conceal it as a prayer request. That's typically how we end up with it, at least when it comes across my desk. Oh, did you hear about so-and-so? We need to pray because of X. I was like, dude, have you spoken to this person? And can I quote you? Most of the time, they don't even come back to church. The enemy's absolutely going to attack within the inside. It's more effective. Something that we're studying in our discipleship group is the apostolic church in the book of Acts. The enemy attacked from the outside. And what happened to the church? It exploded like a wildfire, and it grew. Thousands were being added daily. And then you had one incident, the first one, an attack from within the church. We remember that story of Ananias and Sapphira. They decided to reap a little bit of glory for themselves instead of giving it to the Lord, because they saw the warm welcome of Barnabas. So they lied to the apostles. They lied to the Spirit, is what Peter tells us. And the Lord struck them both down, stopping that initial poison that was trying to seep into the church. Our admonition given in verse 5, I think, is just important for the church now. Know His word and obey His word. Have a close relationship with the Lord and to continue serving the Lord. What are we essentially dealing with? Immersion in Jesus. That's the thing that's going to cause us to thrive, because we're always seeking to live as a solid witness in the presence of the Lord always. Amen? All right, let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for the blessing of this evening. Lord, though easier, this seemed to have been a harder message to swallow. Because, Lord, there's something, I think, in here for all of us. Aspects of gossip, aspects of jumping to conclusions, temptations for an easier worship. Temptations, Lord, to make decisions out of fear, but ones that seem to make sense to us in the time. Making decisions, Lord, for material gain rather than our spiritual health in you. Abandoning your word, Lord, there's just so much. I pray, God, that it's not something that would bring us down, but rather something, Lord, that would encourage us in our growth and in our walk with you. Because, God, I think we all desire to finish the race well. So I pray, Lord, for that strengthening and that boldness, and we love you.